Welcome, everyone. I'm Joel Barna. I'm going to be offering some thoughts for inquiry today and hope that they will stimulate thoughts in you that you will bring forward to share with all of us here in this group. It's a wonderful privilege to be here today. And of course, quite intimidating. So many wonderful teachers and people that I know have vast life experience and vast kindness and gentleness in their lives. So we'll start with 15 minutes of sitting. Ed is going to ring a bell to start and to end the sitting for us. And uh, if you're not muted, please go ahead and mute yourself. I guess everybody is muted. So thank you, Ed. When you get a moment. Please join me in saying the robe chant one time. Vast is the robe of liberation, a formless field of benefaction. Wearing the universal teaching, I realize the one true nature, thus harmonizing all being. In the past, I've had some technical glitches, which have actually resulted in me being disconnected in the middle of a sentence while I'm trying to connect with the inquiry sessions that we're having. I'm confident that won't happen today. I've got some new technology, but I don't know. I thought I was going to be able to print out my talk and be able to read it while we're doing that, but I can't. The paper comes out, but there's no ink on it. So I'm going to have to read from my screen, which means that I won't be looking as I normally would like to do to see how my words are being perceived, to just be able to read the reactions of people on our little squares here. So please bear with me as it looks like I'm not paying any attention to you as I read along. So I'm going to begin here. I have the privilege of meeting with Appamada's Council 2 pretty much every week. Together, we've been reading Shohaku Okamura's book, Realizing Genjo Koan. I've also been listening to the book, Ending the Pursuit of Happiness by Barry Magid, and I'm reading a much newer book called Buddhist Ethics by the philosopher and Buddhist scholar J.L. Garfield. And I want to try and weave some threads from these three books together because they provide me with some questions about my own practice. In his introduction to Realizing Genjo Koan, Okamura writes, at age 13, Dogen was ordained at Enryakuji Monastery on Mount Hiei near Kyoto in the Tendai tradition, one of the two major Buddhist schools at that time. Dogen became unhappy with the practice at Mount Hiei and left there when he was 17. He left the monastery, at least in part, because he was unable to find anyone there who could give him a satisfactory answer to a very important question that arose in his practice. According to his biography, Dogen's question related to the primary Mahayana teaching of Buddha nature, an especially important teaching in the Tendai school of his time. The Hongaku Homan, that is, in English, the Dharma Gate of Original Enlightenment teaching of the Tendai school states that all living and non-living beings are already enlightened Buddhas, since they all have Buddha nature. But Dogen questioned why it is necessary for all Buddhas to arouse way-seeking mind and practice if they were already enlightened Buddhas. In the Buddhist traditions of India, China, and other countries, practice was always very difficult. But why did even the ancient masters who possessed great capability have to practice so hard to attain enlightenment if they were inherently enlightened? Why do any of us have to study and endure such difficult practice if we are already Buddhas? That's from Shohaku Okamura's introduction. As we know, Dogen provided a very subtle and beautiful answer to his own question, which is, I hope I'm not doing too much violence to it, but basically that one does not practice to become Buddha, rather one practices because one is already Buddha, and in doing so drops the one as a separate self out of the statement. I've seen some glimpses of the truth of Dogen's answer in my own practice, I will say, and certainly in the examples of our teachers. But I want to expose my small mind here for just a moment and ask a slightly different question that has been pushing at me recently, and that it first came to me in trying to describe my reaction to some of the writings in Realizing Genjo Koan. My question is, who says that all living and non-living beings are already enlightened Buddhas? This is an axiom of Mahayana Buddhism, and its roots can be found in the Theravadan tradition too. But why? Looking at history and the lives of people today, what evidence indicates that people are inherently enlightened? Certainly, there are examples, rare examples, of people who act compassionately throughout their lives. But why are they so rare if everyone is automatically um, uh, intrinsically enlightened? The Buddha said that people suffer because we live in primal confusion or delusion about what we are. For that is, although everything arises together, our bodies and our minds give us a sense of separation that is very tough for us to let go of. This confusion leads to grasping and aversion, he says. As humans, we instinctively want to stay alive and we want what we consider good to last. At the same time, we want whatever we consider to be bad, which may be something that we thought was good just a moment ago. We want that to end. Humans seem to want aspects of our endlessly streaming experience to fragment and to become manageable. Life has a way of teaching us that this can never work, and that our persistence in delusion is a big ongoing problem. Nevertheless, the Buddha said that our human condition gives us the tools we need to wake up out of delusion, and that in fact, it is suffering itself that can provide that emphasis. Are human beings unique in this regard, however? I mean, if all beings are inherently awakened and have Buddha nature, are human beings unique in having the experience of suffering? How about other sentient beings? Going out for a walk, I have sometimes contemplated one or more trees and thought that they were expressing Buddha nature. But really, isn't that a delusion? Although it unfolds too slowly from my perception, I know that trees are grasping and exhibiting what we, in humans, what we'd call greed, pushing their roots to wherever the nutrients are richest and generating growth in their branches into the air and sunlight that will optimize the life of each tree as a separate entity. And as we know from pollen season, as Austinites or people who live in the Southwest, trees are driven inexorably to sexual reproduction from pollen season. Trees, plants, animals, birds, sea life, arachnids, insects, algae, all kinds of single-cell organisms, everything alive grasps at what will help it continue living as a separate entity and avoids what it is programmed to avoid because that might threaten its separate continuity. Why is that? Because every cell of every living being is driven by a mindless big mind of DNA, a collection of molecules that is not sentient itself, but that drives towards sentience, that collects other molecules together so that they can replicate to exploit the resources available in the environment in the most complex way possible. As humans, we have bodies that are in the process of growing new cells and forcing old cells to die countless times each second, millions of times each second. And we have brains with parts that perform different types of tasks, from wordlessly keeping our circulatory systems functioning to, in other parts of our brain, hungering for connection and more connection and more connection. And finally, to generating reactive but no, I'm sorry, not finally, but also to generating reactive emotion thoughts like sexual desire or disgust. Our brains can even enable us to think in a detached way about the nature of things and about a path to turning our experience from suffering, which we can see through our own experience arises from grasping and aversion, to enlightened activity. What is enlightened activity? It seems to have something to do with any activity that is not focused on perpetuation of the self. So even within our conditioned brains, we have this capacity, as the Buddha pointed to. Shakyamuni Buddha really seemed to emphasize detachment. In the Pali Canon, that is a message over and over again. First, we have to accept the facts of old age, sickness, and death, really. Then we have to cultivate ways to care less about sex, eating, social connections, bodily and mental comfort, All things that our bodies, through our sensory apparatus and our regulatory systems, are constantly urging us to pay attention to. The Buddha says we need to detach from those. According to the Buddha, detachment through these methods of cultivation leads to enlightenment, or even that they are enlightenment. But to jump back a moment, trees, plants, animals, bird life, birds, sea life, arachnids, all the 10,000 things. Everything alive grasps at what will help it continue living as a separate entity and avoids what it is programmed to avoid because it threatens that separate continuity. It seems to me that trees and all these 10,000 things proceed as they do for as long as they do. They live until they die through ongoing grasping and aversion, whether or not that involves sentience. So grasping and aversion are part of all life for all living things. They are not unique to human beings. At the same time, the grasping and the aversion are empty of self, and all the operations of non-sentient beings are empty of self. And that seems to apply to these qualities within us as well. There's no form of life without these qualities. And finally, the operation of these qualities somehow mysteriously sustains the underlying interdependence of life. It seems to me that this fuller recognition of the operation of life through this unfolding of greed and delusion and aversion has something to do with the branching off of Mahayana Buddhism from its earlier roots. Life is a bewilderingly profuse fact, and life's emptiness is a fact. Life's emptiness of self is a fact. Even the qualities that we would like to detach from are in themselves empty and ungraspable, and at the same time, all pervasive. So it seems the ancestors also realized that human beings are in some sense different because we can see our own delusion, which itself means that we don't have to be bound by it. That in some sense, that a tree cannot or that a cricket cannot, we can see our own delusion. So what does this have to do with how I can live my life if I want to suffer less? Here I've got a quote from the book Buddhist Ethics by J.L. Garfield. He says, we first need to get over the delusion that we can escape sickness, old age, and death, particularly death. He argues that all of us have a psychological awareness of death pretty much all the time, and that we spend most of our time cultivating ways to dissociate from that awareness. Garfield writes, the point is that the simultaneous pervasive awareness of our mortality and the repression of that awareness sends us into a cycle of confusion about our nature, attraction, and aversion. Living an awakened life, Garfield says, requires a confrontation with that fear of death and an overcoming of it. Even when we are at what seems to be our best, we are subject to primal fear and anxiety, and that means that at any moment we can be propelled to a less morally and hedonically salutary mood, that we can tip over into doing unwise things and feeling unwise feelings. Anger, he says, anger or unhappiness can arise even on the beach or while volunteering in the soup kitchen or while sitting in meditation. So since fear is the great driver of pathology, the ultimate goal of moral practice must be a kind of freedom from that fear and from the confusion, attraction, and aversion it conditions. That is, the ultimate goal of moral practice constitutes a revolution in our moral psychology that allows us to experience the world in a way so different from our natural experience that we cannot even possibly fall into adverse moral moods. Buddhist ethics is concerned primarily not with how we act in the world, but how we see the world in which we act. Actions are important, but secondary, flowing from moral vision. Buddhist ethical practice is therefore devoted to cultivating a more salutary or healthy ethical perception of the world, one that is more salutary because it is less diluted. The cultivation of wisdom and the relinquishment of delusion is hence at the heart of ethical development. So I'm going to try and weave another thread here from Barry Magid in answer to the question that arises for me. What does it feel like to experience a revolution in moral psychology in a full awareness of the basis of human psychology? Maybe something like what Barry Magid describes in this passage. He says, when Zen Master Joshu was a young monk, he asked his teacher Nansen, "What is the way?" Nansen replied, "Your ordinary mind is the way." By ordinary, Nansen meant the mind Joshu already had. He didn't need to turn it or himself into something else. He didn't need to put, as the Zen saying goes, another head on top of the one he already had. Unfortunately, these days when we hear the word ordinary, we are inclined to think it means average or typical or even mediocre. We contrast ordinary with special and decide, given the choice, we'd rather be special. But our practice won't make us special. It will keep bringing us back to who we really are. Nansen's message to Joshu ought to be good news. Who you already are is exactly what you've been looking for. But for most of us, it feels like anything but. We go into therapy, and Barry Magid, of course, is himself a therapist. We go into therapy or Zen practice precisely because we don't like all sorts of things about the mind we've got. And we're more than eager to sign up for anything that holds out the prospect of being able to trade it in for a newer, shinier model. I'll interject a shinier model that doesn't have so much grasping or aversion and isn't so deluded about old age, sickness, and death. He continues, the tension between ordinary mind as the way and ordinary mind as the problem forms the crux of our practice. None of us wants to accept the mind that we have got. We come to practice because there are aspects of our mind that we don't know how to come to terms with. So I want to end with one more quotation and with a short poem. The quotation is from Matthew Jukson Sullivan's idiosyncratic translation of the Blue Cliff Record, which he calls The Garden of Flowers and Weeds. Reflecting on the use of Buddha's use of lotuses as metaphors for humans, Sullivan writes, Buddha nature is born in the mud of our imperfect lives, is fertilized in the mud of our imperfect lives, and grows up out of our imperfect lives. Is it perfect? That's unclear. But one thing is certain. The lotus itself doesn't know it is perfect. The lotus doesn't even know it has given birth to a flower. The lotus, after all, is just being a lotus. It doesn't have to think about how to be a lotus. But you who sit at the water's edge, you know when the lotus flower has emerged. It is beautiful and miraculous. Just look. Your meditation practice is the same way. If your flower emerges from the water, you won't even know it has happened. After all, as Shakyamuni said in the Bahuna Sutra, enlightenment is freed, dissociated, and released from form, feeling, perception, fabrications, and consciousness. The implications of this statement are stupefying. Your awakening is not for your own benefit, and that's why you might not even notice it. Only a bystander sitting on the edge of your pond may see the lotus bloom, or they may not. That's not your concern. The lotus doesn't have any concerns. Finally, to wrap this up, coming back to Dogen's question, why meditate if we are already fully enlightened? What does it mean that ordinary mind is the way? What does it mean that the lotus doesn't notice that it's blooming? What does it mean that practice is not separate from enlightenment? I want to end on something that speaks to me to these questions. It's one of my favorite poems by the 19th century poet Antonio Machado. It says, Traveler, your footprints are the only road, nothing else. Traveler, there is no road. You make your own path as you walk. As you walk, you make your own road, and when you look back, you see the path you will never travel again. Traveler, there is no road, only a ship's wake on the sea. I want to offer thanks to Peg and Flint, to the ancestors and all the 10 things, and particularly to the members of Council 2 for helping me wake up to the fact that I have what I need, even if I can't put my finger on it at any given moment. But I know that I have the support of my teachers, the 10,000 things, and of everyone here. That concludes my talk. Please give me your thoughts. Carolyn, welcome, and thank you. It's so nice to see you. I haven't talked to you in 5 years, I think.
Well, it's been a while. I don't know if it's been 5 years, but it's been a while. And hello, everybody. I'm Carolyn. I have never spoken on one of these, what do you call it?
Inquiry.
Online inquiries. So,
Hmm.
but your talk was so good, Joel. I love that talk and I love your sources. And so I'm compelled to offer something in response. And um, I think this question is such a deep one about Buddha nature and how do we have faith in Buddha nature, given, it's not evident that we're all already awake and already enlightened. And what's come to me over time, and I have no idea historically how the notion of Buddha nature, inherent Buddha nature actually arose, but I have like an idea of how it might have arisen. And that is that when we think of enlightenment as something in the future that needs to be gained, there's too much striving in the practice, and the striving fabricates and strengthens the self delusion, especially if I'm, with a bunch of other monks and we're all monks, monastics, nuns, and we're all competing with each other and grading how far we are, stream enter, arhat, etc. Their stages. Um, and so I wonder if I didn't emerge from the experience of awakening much more as a process of letting go than of gaining. And that direct experience of like, letting go, then originates the idea, it's already here. Because the process of awakening is more letting go of the process of delusion than it is taking on new, fresh qualities that I didn't have before. So that's my thought. I don't know how coherent it is, but perhaps it's helpful.
I I I love the way you've expressed that, Carolyn. That makes a lot of sense to me. And something that I was trying to point to and didn't really say very clearly, I think matches up with that or goes with that, which is that not only do I can I stop this striving because that's ultimately unskillful, but that I can stop excluding things like grasping, like aversion, that even those can be recognized as part of the truth of my life. And that somehow that was the also because you look at a tree, you look at this tiger eating the goat, and you look at everything all around us in the world. Those factors are around us all the time. Can they really be excluded from the truth? If we're going to embrace the truth, it's got to include everything. And as but there's something like that.
Yes,
And
can I push back a little bit though, because I'm not sure about the tree having grasping and aversion. I think in my view, yes, the tree is definitely, doing their activities of nourishment and avoidance of sickness and so on. But I think when I hear the words grasping and aversion, I think delusion is built into those concepts. And so the healthful process of eating and supporting your life and being a wholesome, healthy body, I don't think has to have the delusional aspects of the grasping and aversion. And those could be really simple delusions like, once I eat this chocolate cake, I'm never going to have chocolate cake again. This is the last chocolate cake or something, the story that goes along with the grasping that's itself just untrue.
Mhm.
Yeah. But I'm open to your view. I just haven't tried it
I,
looking at the animals
I,
and the
I
plants
think, I think you're
that
completely
way.
right. I think you're
Yeah.
right that delusion is built into it, and that the Buddha said that from the beginning. What I'm trying to indicate is that the what we call grasping and aversion arise at the cellular level in us, in the same way that they do in all the other things that we can look at and try and compare ourselves with, and try and see a distinction of ourselves with instead of a unity with. And that seeing, seeing the interconnectedness kind of softens the edges of the delusion by, softening our aversion to doing the wrong thing, to acting in the wrong way, to being self-centered, and to kind of falling back and just like, man, that's the way things are. And yeah, I do have a choice of how I'm going to act, but I'm never going to get out of this situation where this will not, I'm never going to be in a situation where this will not be a challenge, right?
That's very challenging. I'm going to contemplate your view and thank you for expressing it so clearly. Well done. Thank you, Joel.
Thank you, Carolyn. Thank you.
Thank you. And it looks like we have Becky up next.
Hi,
And
Becky.
Um, so, um, I think that what you're talking about is something so basic and wonderful to be able to talk about in the many ways that it touches. One of the things that is really clear to me is that the sooner we can recognize our mortality, truly accept it, the easier all the other factors become, which sounds kind of odd, but it's my experience. That we need to talk about it more with each other and with our experiences around it, our feelings and so on. I think we need to talk about that more, because almost like, unless we do, all of the other delusions are somehow they just glom on to all of that. And yeah, I'm going to tell a story that happened last week that I may have mentioned to some people already, but I live in assisted living, and so there's people who are always aware of how are you doing, and so I was down in the lobby, and there were two women there, and one of them asked, "How are you doing today, Becky?" And I said, "Well, I'm doing pretty good today." And then I said, "And this too shall pass." And which is something I say to myself inside really frequently, because mostly we say that in relationship to things we don't like, and to give us the idea that we don't have to have that, in our way, because it'll pass. But the whole thing about impermanence is that it's every direction, back and forth, and eventually our no longer being in this realm in this way will be the past that we don't know anything beyond. Well, not that we know anything now anyway, but we think we do sometimes. So one of the people responded by saying to me, "Oh, Becky, don't give up hope. You've got to have, a positive take on it and go for that and so on." And the other person said, I think I get it. I think I get it why you say that. It's because if you know it's going to pass, then you enjoy right now as big as you can. And so, I think that whole concept about impermanence and about death is one of the main things that we need to just be right out there with each other all the time. And so that's one of the ways that we support each other to be the fullest we can right now.
Thank you so much for you have shared that story in my hearing before, Becky, and I really appreciate it. And I really appreciate the point that you're making. That again, that delusions glom onto other delusions, and they make a big sticky pile of delusion, and then where are you? That there's that your friend's reaction, your friend's reaction is like, oh, I get it. It's not, like I'm being gloomy if I say this too will pass. If I know that my experience is changing from moment to moment, and that my health and my feeling of well-being that I have right now could shift, and that I may be in pain tomorrow. That doesn't mean that you have to be gloomy about it. It does mean that it is a way in which you are not fearfully grasping onto whatever that feeling is, which frees you then to be more joyous in this moment.
Yes.
And Flint recently, gave a talk in which he quoted the famous um, koan of the teacher who had a teacup that was very beautiful, and he would take his teacup out and say, "Oh, it's so beautiful." And his students said, "You say we're not supposed to be grasping onto everything." And the teacher says, "To me, I know this cup is going to break one day, and it's already, it's in a sense already broken. So I can appreciate it better now with that knowledge." And that's a wonderful metaphor for us, that as your friend, who I doubt, given your situation, what I know of your situation, that your friend has a developed Buddhist practice, but has natural insight into this fact. That's a wonderful thing.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, Chris.
Hi, Joel. I wanted to ask, what was the first book that you read from today?
Oh, thank you. Yes, I saw that message from you in chat, and I actually answered it in the chat.
Oh, okay.
The book is called Realizing Genja Koan by Shohaku Okumura.
Okay.
And it's a very deep, it's a book that we, as I say, we've been reading in a council too. And the basic text from Genja Koan is subtle and hard to unpack, and has lots of layers of language and translation and psychology that are different, very different from our own contemporary world. And Okumura himself is subtle and lives in a different culture, or bridges ours and a different culture as well. As he's a very skilled writer in English, but can unpack a lot of things. But a delightful book that I could not possibly read without the support of the other people in council too, because it's so dense. So I know it's been read by the group in Depth and Practice, and I hope you have better concentration than I on reading difficult texts. So
I don't know how you've concluded that.
it's a hope. It's a hope.
Well, that was all I needed to hear to convince me that I want to read that.
Okay.
if only someone would write a book like that on every koan. No, I'm kidding.
Well, so let me say, I'm really that, you know, I've got 3 books that I'm working with right now. There's Barry Madgen's book called Ending the Pursuit of Happiness, among excellent writings by Barry Madgen, you know, whom you know is a former student of Joko Beck, as
I did not
was,
know that.
and yeah, and he speaks of her quite a bit in his writing. And you know, as a acolyte of Joko Beck, he shares a lot of the threads that get woven into Appamada's style of practice as well. Um, there's that book, and then the book called Buddhist Ethics by Jay Garfield. I read another book by Jay Garfield called Unwinding the Self. I know I'm probably saying that book title wrong, but it's something like that. It's how we are not selves, we are persons, and persons are ever shifting moments of connection. You know, that we are nodes of connection that are always in process and never fixed. A wonderful book, and again, quite challenging for me to grasp onto. So and I'm really enjoying what he's writing about Buddhist ethics. And this notion that we have to be able to face fear if we want to have any chance of being ethical in this world. If we want to have a chance of expressing compassion, we have to first face our fear enough to at least see some daylight around it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. We have just a few minutes before our closing time, and we can just sit together until about 28 minutes past the hour. I'm going to read a brief section from the Eihei Koso Hotsuganmon, and then at the end, I'll ask you to join me in saying the 4 practice principles 3 times. Dogen writes, "May all Buddhas and ancestors who have attained the Buddha way be compassionate to us and free us from karmic effects, allowing us to practice the way without hindrance. May they share with us their compassion, which fills the boundless universe with the virtue of their enlightenment and teachings. Buddhas and ancestors of old were as we. We, in the future, shall be Buddhas and ancestors. Revering Buddhas and ancestors, we are one Buddha and one ancestor. Awakening Bodhi mind, we are one Bodhi mind. Because they extend their compassion to us freely and without limit, we are able to attain Buddhahood and let go of the attainment." Please join me in saying the 4 practice principles. Caught in the self-centered dream, only suffering. Holding to self-centered thoughts, exactly the dream. Each moment, life as it is, the only teacher. Being just this moment, compassion's way. Caught in the self-centered dream, only suffering. Holding to self-centered thoughts, exactly the dream. Each moment, life as it is, the only teacher. Being just this moment, compassion's way. Caught in the self-centered dream, only suffering. Holding to self-centered thoughts, exactly the dream. Each moment, life as it is, the only teacher. Being just this moment, compassion's way. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Joel. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Joel. And I just want to remind everybody as they go that Apamata's programs and facilities are supported through your generosity, through our generosity. Please know your support makes a huge, huge difference. And there's a link at the website for contributions at apamata.org/contribute. And if you'd like to stick around for another half hour, please just stay here online, click yourself into gallery view, and we'll be right with you and enjoy that. Thank you.